Today we're going to add to our types and talk about some special values that certain types can hold. So far we've covered number, string, and Boolean. We're going to learn about some additional types today, undefined and object. We've already looked at how you determine a type of some expression or some literal or some variable. You can just use the type of function and pass in as a parameter whatever you want to check the type of. So you could have some expression or some variable or a Boolean or a number or a string, and that will return a string value with the name of the type. So let's look at a new type. We've seen undefined because the console returns us undefined, and so let's actually talk about what it means. It means it's a variable that doesn't have a value. It could be given a value later, but there's no meaningful definition at the time of evaluation, and therefore it returns undefined. There's only one possible value for that undefined type, which is also undefined. So both the type and the value of undefined returns undefined. Let's look at an example. If we create some variable, some name, the console is giving us back undefined, but that's because nothing is being returned to the console. It's just creating a variable, so it returns undefined. But if we look at the type of some name, you can see it is returning us the type undefined. Well, do you remember how we get the value from a variable? Well, we just type in the variable name. So if we want to get the value of some name, I can type in some name, and you can see that the value is also undefined. The next new type I want to talk about is object. The object type is actually a container for different properties and methods. And we're going to cover objects in more detail later in the course as we start writing more advanced programs. But for now, we need to understand the special value null, and null is of type object. So we need to at least touch on what an object is so that we can understand that type when we're using the null. So here's an example. I've created a variable called professor, and I've used some interesting syntax with the curly braces. And like I said, it's not something you have to learn right now. We're going to cover that later. But you can create a variable, and look, I ran into that quotation mark problem again. They have to be the standard quotations and not the word processor quotations. So now I've created my object professor, and because we stored that into the variable, it's returning undefined. It has nothing to do with the professor object. If we look at the type of our professor object, it's going to give us object back because that's its type. If we want to see what's inside the professor object, we type the name of the variable, and that will give us back the results. The reason we want to learn about the object now is because if we look at the special value null, its type is object. So we're going to focus on the fact that null is an object right now. We're going to learn about the object types in more detail later. So let's look at some of those special values. We're going to cover null and not a number. Let's start with null because we've already been talking about null. Null means that the variable has no value. Null is different than undefined because undefined means we just don't have any idea what it is yet, and null is expressly saying it has no value. It's nothing. So we can set variables to null in order to indicate that there is no value. And remember, when we set variables to some value, that variable then takes on the type of that value. Let's look at an example. So let's create a variable named nothing, and we'll set that equal to null. Again, the undefined is just because the console isn't returning anything, it's storing something into memory at nothing. So if we look at the type of nothing, it's an object. That's kind of funny that nothing is an object, but that's how the type is defined in JavaScript. And so if we look at the value of nothing, you can see that value is null, that nothing is set to nothing. Now we can change that and set it to a number. And now that type of nothing switches to the number. But if we have no value, it's a good idea to set it to null so that we understand and can look for the fact that there's nothing in that yet. It needs to be set in order to be used. The last special value I want to cover today is not a number. This value is for expressions that are being used as a number but can't be converted to a number and therefore get the value of not a number. So the capital N, lowercase a, capital N means not a number. And it's kind of funny because not a number is of the type number because it is the representation of a number that isn't a number. Let's look at an example. So let's say we want to convert to a number our expression hello. Oh, and it's missing a quotation mark there. I'll add that in there. So if we want to look at what the number of hello is, the number is a function, and that function is then going to convert the string hello to a number. Well, what number is hello equal to? Did you learn that in grade school? Well, I didn't. Nobody taught me how to convert words into numbers. JavaScript doesn't know either. So it's going to return us that value, not a number. Now, if we want to store that result into a variable, we just create a var, give it a name, and then we can assign it to the result of converting hello to a number. Now remember, the undefined is just the console return. So if we want to know what is in the value of hello, what did we store in there? It's that not a number value. Now if we look at the type of the value of hello, and that's that variable storing not a number, it gives us the type number. So it's a way of handling expressions that are expected to be used as a number but can't be converted to a number. Then when JavaScript sees those cases, it converts it to not a number, so it can still be a number type and give meaningful information back to the programmer. So that wraps up this lecture. We learned about undefined and object types and added special values of null and not a number.